everybody, welcome back. Once again, I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J, with a Miyagi shirt on today. Joining me with the Phi Slamma Jamma shirt is Talmadge Roger Varnado the third.
Yes,
I would say come on down. That felt like a come on down moment, but you're already sitting beside me.
Barker. Dun, 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 dun.
Let's do some plinko up in here. All right, so for today's topic, we're going to be, I think this is our first exclusively NFL-related content that we've done.
Surprising, but
surprising. We're finally getting around to talking some NFL. We do love the NBA, but you're going to find out we also like the NFL, and we're going to do some talking about that.
Next week, pro wrestling.
We actually can, and there's our first topic within a topic for this episode. Might not be the last, but we're going to talk about today. I've chosen 5 running backs and what we think their outlook for this coming season will be. Now, each of these guys either will be first-time, full-time starters this season, or we're just going to look at, based on what we saw last year, what do we expect? What do we kind of see maybe as a projection for the coming season? So the first guy that I have chosen is Zamir White of the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'll start by saying this. In a 17-game season, for those of you that have not done the math, a player only needs to average 58.82 yards per game in order to have a 1,000-yard rushing season. So there's that. Okay. So Zamir White began last season as a backup to Josh Jacobs, who had led the league in rushing the year before. Zamir made his first career start week 15 of the previous season. He is entering his 3rd season now. So he was a second-year player, hadn't played much, made his first career start in week 15. Started 4 games. He started the final 4 games of the season.
And this is of 2022?
23. So
23.
the very last season we had. He started just 4 games, but during that 4-game stretch, he did average 99.25 yards per game. He finished the season 104 carries, 451 yards, and 1 touchdown. His 1 touchdown and most of those yards did come in those last 4 games. Josh Jacobs is no longer with the Las Vegas Raiders. Everything points to Zamir White being their lead back and quite possibly their undisputed workhorse running back for the season. They do still have Davante Adams, so he's not going to get every touch. Davante's still out there at wide receiver. But based on what we saw, even though it was a small sampling in those 4 games last year, and now with no Josh Jacobs, what are your thoughts on going into this season about Zamir White?
This one's tough, and I have to be honest, I don't know a ton about him as a player.
Okay.
I know the name, I know the Raiders situation, so based on that, I'll try to come up with a educated answer the best I can.
Okay.
I think a lot will be determined by the draft next week.
Yes.
Because my guess is they're probably going to draft another back in the later rounds.
Possibly.
Because in today's
And
NFL,
by the way, let me just say, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we're shooting this a few days before the NFL
Right.
draft. Y'all will be seeing it afterwards. So if you're thinking, what's wrong with them? Do they not know when the draft was? Yes, it's April 25th through the 27th. We're shooting this prior to the draft. So anyway, sorry, go ahead. Just want to get some context.
That's a good point because people would be confused by that.
Right.
What's he talking about? But if they don't draft another back, then I would venture to say that his numbers are going to be fairly similar. And like everything else, the league's going to have a book on him now. They know his running style.
Right.
It may drop
now
a
it's
little.
not who's this guy that's
Right.
starting for Josh Jacobs.
And a 99-yard average, I mean, that's pretty tough to maintain in today's NFL.
For 17 games, he
Yeah.
would probably lead the league.
There's no probably involved.
Yeah.
He would.
Yeah.
And the other thing, too, is I know the head coach is the same, but I don't know how much change was made on his coaching staff, like offensive coordinator, that kind of thing.
True. And the head coach, he took over part of the way through the season
Right.
last year. So this will be his first full
Putting
season.
in his system. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of variables. Now, if you're asking me talent-wise, will he do well? Yes. But without knowing who they're going to draft and what their style is going to be with a first-year full-time head coach.
Right.
It's tough to say, but I would venture to say, if I had to say on a scale of 1 to 10, how successful would he be? I would say a 7.
Okay.
At the very lowest. So my thought is he'll be
Pretty
productive.
successful, yeah. And you may or may not know this, and some of the audience may or may not know this, and that does, in fact, encompass all possibilities when you really think about it. And even if you don't, the Raiders did also sign Alexander Mattison, who was the Vikings running back last year. So it's not as if Zamir doesn't have any competition. And if they draft another guy, there's one more in the room. Whether they do or whether they don't will remains to be seen, at least by us right now. Again, y'all have probably already known. Anyway, we're not going to go back to that over and over, Kelly Tripucka says. But I have similar thoughts. Based on the small sampling size last year, the guy proved he can take some pretty big leaps in a game. His season high in rushing yards last year was week 16, 22 carries, 145 yards. Now, will he sustain a 99.25 average over 17 games? It's not impossible, but I don't think it's probable for a myriad of reasons. First of all, if he's getting that much usage, he may not stay healthy for 17 games.
And in this NFL,
In
is
this
any running
NFL,
back
yeah.
gonna get that
Is
much
any
usage?
running back
Yeah.
going to get outside of maybe Christian McCaffrey, if you combine his carries and receptions, a lot of guys just don't get that volume. So I don't expect Zamir to average nearly 100 yards a game for 17 games. But I will agree with Talmadge. Based on what we saw last year and based on the increased opportunity, I think he'll probably be, barring injury, 1,000-yard running back. Will he be amongst the top, 5 elite? He could, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. Alexander Mattison will still get some usage. It's probably Zamir White's job to lose based on what we saw last year.
And I forgot about Madison. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I still think they could draft a back, though, because you're going to want a different type of back as well. You're going to want the bruiser back. You're going to want the back that can catch the ball.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So depending on how they view both of those backs is
Exactly.
going to dictate who they draft.
So we'll see how that goes in this upcoming season. But yeah, it sounds like we have similar outlooks to Zamir. All right, second guy I want to talk about is Jerome Ford. He's also entering his third season. Didn't know a lot about him at the beginning of last year. He took over, Cleveland Browns. Still with Cleveland Browns. He took over Cleveland's starting job after Nick Chubb suffered a season-ending knee injury in week 2. Jerome Ford did play all 17 games, started 12 because he had some injury problems of his own later in the year. For the season, he did only have two 100-yard rushing games. He finished the season 204 carries, 813 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. He added 44 receptions for 319 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. Now, Nick Chubb is coming off of a torn MCL and a damaged ACL.
Right.
He had 2 off-season surgeries. So with all that information, what do you think you can expect from Jerome Ford this year?
I think Jerome Ford's going to have a productive year, even with Chubb coming back. Obviously, it's a major injury, and usually that type of injury, it takes a full year to really bounce back and show who you are. Plus, Chubb's had a lot of usage. Even though they've had the split back situation in the past, he's still got a ton of usage.
Yes.
So I would expect they want to keep his carries to a certain number. And that being said, Ford has proven he can be a lead back in today's NFL. I hate to keep saying this, but the back is used so differently than it was when we were coming up in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s, to where you just want backs that can fit a certain role, do a certain thing. You want somebody who can catch the ball. You want the next guy to be short yards. You want the next guy to be a combination of both. And you can find backs so later in the draft. And the rules dictate that they're going to throw the ball more anyway. So keep in mind, I'm not saying Ford's going to be some sort of Hall of Fame back, but based on how the NFL is today and Cleveland's offense, because they've always run the football under this regime, I can't imagine that he won't be productive.
You go back to Jim Brown and even the Leroy Horde days, and they've always been a team that likes to pound the football.
Because of weather and all those kinds of things. But with this staff specifically, they've continued that tradition. They've always had good backs, and they've always used their backs wisely. I expect that to continue. I will say this. I'm interested in that entire team because I think, believe it or not, that coach's job might be a little hot. The seat might be a little hot.
Okay.
Because they've kind of gone... he's turned them around, but
Yeah.
they've not made that next step. A lot's going to come down to. I know we're talking running backs, but it's going to come down to Watson. Is he going to return to the player he was in Houston?
Because when you have an elite defense that they have, and then you have to ask the question, why didn't we go deeper? There's where the hot seat might come in because, yes, Deshaun Watson, yes, we had Nick Chubb injured.
And they've mortgaged their future on that trade because they've given up all their draft picks. I think they draft, and again, not to get confused, but where the draft hadn't happened yet, I think they drafted 52nd this year.
Maybe
they
so.
They don't have a first round.
They're not going to get an elite anybody.
Right, so it's going to be tough. But I would say, again, getting back to our topic, he'll be productive. I figure maybe if he gets 800 yards, I'm good with that because you figure Chubb's going to get
a healthy Nick
yards as
Chubb's
well.
going to cut into that, yeah. So, yeah, I would say very similar. Jerome Ford, I don't see him as a superstar by any means, but he proved he can be a lead back. He was pretty productive. He had some pretty good games when he was healthy, and he's an asset for anybody's backfield. Nick Chubb coming back. If Nick Chubb comes back fully healthy week 1, don't be surprised to see kind of a system like you have with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. But Nick Chubb, traditionally, historically, he's more on a Hall of Fame path. Will he be the same? Will he even be ready week 1? I wouldn't be surprised to see Jerome Ford as their lead back rack up some 100-yard games for the first 5 or 6 games, work Nick Chubb back into the lineup, and to your strong point, it may still be another season before we really see the Nick Chubb we're expecting. I wouldn't be shocked. This is not a prediction or even that I think it's a most likely. I wouldn't be entirely shocked to see Jerome Ford get right around 1,000 yards rushing this year. He had over 1,100 yards combined, 44 receptions for a running back, especially for a team that likes to run the ball. That's pretty good. He's a pretty good receiver. So contingent upon when Nick Chubb comes back and how he's used, I wouldn't be shocked to see Jerome Ford go for 1,000 yards. But to your point, with a healthy Nick Chubb getting usage, if Jerome Ford gets 700 to 800 and Nick Chubb gets 800 to 900, you got a darn good backfield duo there. So him getting 1,000 yards is not really what is going to determine really how good he is, honestly, with Nick Chubb being back. But with Nick Chubb being out, I wouldn't be shocked to see him get around the 1,000-yard mark, to be honest. Third guy on the list is a guy that actually changed teams from last year, and that is Zach Moss. He played 14 games in 2023, starting 8. He was with the Indianapolis Colts, started 8 games for an injured Jonathan Taylor. Did pretty darn well. In my opinion, he proved he can be a starting running back in this league.
He sliced my Titans up, that's for sure. He had like 160 yards.
That was one of his bigger games, if I remember. And if I, not to get too far off, was that the same game that Gardner Minshew threw for well over 300 yards against him, or was that a different?
And what's our next topic? So hopefully you got your answer.
So Zach Moss is now with the Cincinnati Bengals. He finished 2023 with 183 carries, 794 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. He did add 27 receptions, 192 yards, 2 touchdowns. So if you do the math, he was like 16 yards shy of 1,000 yards of total offense last year. And that was, again, really only starting until Jonathan Taylor, who's one of the best backs in the league, was back prepared to take over that starting role. So now reflecting on last year, and now he's in a new system, new team. Yes, Chase Brown's an exciting, explosive, about to be second-year player. This is pretty much Zach Moss's backfield. He's playing now with Joe Burrow, Jamar R. Pursue Diligently, or Jamar R. Chase, and possibly T. Higgins.
We'll see.
That's why I say possibly, and yep, there may already be an answer to that by the time we upload this episode. All of that said, how you feeling about Zach Moss's 2024 season?
He's the most interesting because I find the team fit interesting. But I think of the backs we've mentioned, believe it or not, I feel like he has the most talent. I think he was underused a little bit.
I don't necessarily disagree with that.
I think he was underused a bit with the Colts, but there's a reason. Jonathan Taylor's great. We get it.
Yeah.
So it's a time for him to shine. I'm curious to see what he'll do in this offense because they are a passing offense. Their offensive line is better than it's been before, but it's still not one of the elite offensive lines in the league. So that might be a detriment to him. But I think he has a creative head coach. I think he will get the majority of the carries. I think he does have lead back talent.
Yeah.
So a lot of variables here as well. It's just funny how we keep him back to that word, but the running back position is so hard to judge today in the NFL. But I would say I could see him getting 1,100 yards.
Okay.
I think the only thing that's going to hold him back in this offense, he's going to need to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield. And while
also pass block better than had been asked to do before.
He's okay at both. He's not somebody who pops on film in either category. So I think they're going to
he had 27 receptions last year. Right. So that's not...
And that tells you.
That doesn't stand out.
And so, by the yardage, it was a bunch of dump-offs and screens. Like it is with a bunch of running backs, I get that. But some backs, like a McCaffrey...
But he didn't rip those into very long runs because of the yardage.
And he doesn't... And there's a difference in catching a screen pass and actually having a running back who can run
routes.
Like a Tajay Spears or even
McCaffrey.
Even a Pollard.
Yeah, he's a pretty good,
But basically, he's going to leak out of the backfield, catch a screen like a Derrick Henry, that sort of thing.
Like Breece Hall did a lot at the end of last year because their quarterbacks were so terrible.
Yeah,
they just dump it off, and Breece took off with it.
And bad offensive lines also dictate that dump it off. So if he's not successful, to me, that's going to be the reason. I'm not sure this is a great fit for him because they require their backs to do the Joe Mixon kind of stuff, the P-Ryan type of stuff, and he's not so great at that. But talent-wise, I think he's the best of the backs we've talked about, so I'm kind of conflicted. But again, if he has 1,100 yards, I think that's very attainable, and I think he can get that.
And to me, Zach Moss really impressed me last year because when Jonathan Taylor went down, that's the type of thing that derails a team. Anthony Richardson also got injured. The fact that the Colts were competitive last year.
Game away from the playoffs.
Yeah. It really does
say.
Play
away from the playoffs, really.
One play away from the playoffs really does say a lot. And I have no vested personal interest in Zach Moss. I don't know the guy. But I'm excited that he got traded somewhere where he can be a lead back because I think he earned it. If he was simply backing up Jonathan Taylor again, I think that would be sad because, to your point, the talent is there. He proved he could start somewhere. There's teams in the league that don't have a Jonathan Taylor that should want a Zach Moss. So I'm happy that he's going somewhere where we can see what he can do over a full season. And based on what we saw last year, I completely concur. 11, even 1,200 yards in Cincinnati's offense, I don't think that would be surprising if he stays healthy. To your point, he may have to adapt his game some, may and will have to, but he's got pretty good weapons around him.
Oh, yeah.
We know Burrow and Chase both had some injuries last year, but if that happens, he might just get more handoffs.
I agree.
So, I think Zach Moss will have a pretty good season coming up. I'll be shocked if he doesn't. Like, if he goes there and struggles and people say, well, he clearly isn't a lead back, I'll be pretty surprised. He's talented enough.
He's shown he can do it.
Yeah, if he doesn't, something's going to be very strange.
And I didn't realize he was as powerful a runner.
Because he's only 5'9", 205. He's not a big guy.
He reminds me of years ago, the Dolphins had a back, Lamar Smith.
Oh,
Just a short, stout, bowling ball type of back with some good speed, good explosiveness, never gave up on a play, a one cut and run type of guy. So, yeah, I like him a lot as a player.
Yeah, and I think we could expect him to have a pretty good year. All right, these next two guys that I have, in my opinion, are two of the more exciting running backs in the league. We're going to start with a guy entering his second season, Devon Achahani. And before you comment that that's not how to pronounce his name, I am aware of it. Achahani is more fun to say. You can still tell me that's wrong, but just know that I do know.
For those that watch your channel, they understand.
They should really have figured out by now that this is how I'm going to say the guy's name. He is entering his second season. He played in 11 games last year, started 4 of them. He did have some injuries that derailed him. He's 5'9", 188. And if there's a criticism about him, it's always that. Well, he's just so small. That's why he got injured. In those 11 games, 4 of which he started, he went over 100 yards rushing 4 times and over 200 yards once. And in that 200-yard rushing game, he also caught some passes and had 4 total touchdowns, 2 rushing, 2 receiving. For the season, he had 103 carries, 800 yards, so 7.8 yards per carry. And those of you that don't follow football, that's pretty stinking impressive.
And by the way, what team does he play for? For those that don't
My
know.
apologies. The Miami Dolphins.
go.
Thank you very much for bringing me back to that. He had 8 rushing touchdowns, 27 receptions, 197 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. So in only 11 games, he had 997 total yards of total offense and 11 total touchdowns. He averaged 72.72 yards per game rushing. If you calculate that over a 17-game season, it's 1,236 yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. He does share the backfield with Raheem Mostert. He's also a pretty darn good running back. The knock on Ahahani is his lack of size, and he's not a workhorse back.
Right.
He's not the lead back. He splits time with Mostert. The Dolphins just signed Mostert to a 2-year contract extension. With all that being said, Talmadge Roger Varnado III, what's your outlook for Devon Ahahani in this coming season?
This one is tough. Their offense will allow him to have some touches, and he is explosive, but the size does scare me. But the beauty of it is they already know that. It's not like they didn't know that last
Exactly.
year, and he was this productive. So I hate to sound so vanilla, but I just see him putting basically the same type of numbers he put up last year. That yard per carry average is very impressive. Their offensive line is not quite as good, or I don't think it's going to be quite as good as it was last year. They did sign Aaron Brewer, center from Tennessee. Undersized center, horrible pass blocker, but a better run blocker than you would think. That may help because he's a really good run blocker from the center position, but horrible in pass protection. So I'd be concerned about that if I were the Dolphins. But yeah, just similar production. I don't think he's going to pop off the page. He's always going to have to be a back, like most backs nowadays. You're going to have to be in a committee. You're going to have to split time.
He's got his specialty.
Yeah, this is what you do.
You got to pair him with the right.
Wind it up. They'll do it again. The offensive coach is the head coach, obviously, so he's always going to find ways to get him the ball.
Right.
And so I basically the same numbers. I don't see any kind of elevation.
Huge
or
variance one way or another. To me, he's one of the most exciting players in the league. Yes, he's undersized. I get that. Man, his speed, his burst, his acceleration, he is fun to watch.
They have a ton of team speed.
They got some of the fast. Him, Tyreek, Mostert, Jalen Waddle, all those guys can burn you. And the criticisms I hear, his size, like you said, we know that. The Dolphins know that. But he's not big enough to be a workhorse running back. He wasn't last year.
Well, plus who is
there's
a
Raheem
workhorse back in today's league?
There's a few.
You've got 3 or 4.
Yeah, there's a few, but
that's it.
To your point,
Because Derrick Henry's not even going to be one in Baltimore. He won't be a workhorse.
not
back.
like he once was. But there's the James Connors in Arizona's and Christian McCaffrey's. There's some, but to your point, the game's changed so much.
And even, not to get off track, but even Connor, he's got a solid career. He's a good back, but he's not going to be the reason why they win or lose football games.
I concur. I just mean like the workhorse back, the solid. He's out there every play, mostly getting the carries. But yes, James Conner's a workhorse back, but he's not going to carry the team. Right. He's not like Christian McCaffrey or Derrick Henry.
And they probably should split his time. That's my point. He's a workhorse back out of necessity.
Yeah,
but if they get another back in the draft, or if they were to trade for another back, I guarantee you his time would be split.
His time with his carries, they want to protect him a little more because he also missed 4 games with the knee injury last year. We're not really here to talk about James Conner, but a topic within a topic. James Conner's productivity. All the stuff about Ahahani not being a workhorse and, they just signed Mostert. There was some uproar about the Dolphins signing Mostert to 2 years, and I say to all of that, who cares? Devon Ahahani does not need to be a workhorse running back to be productive. Right. He showed us that last year. The guy averages 7.8 yards per carry. Right. I don't care that he don't need 25 carries a game. He could get 18 or 12 and still destroy a team because of his explosiveness.
Well, and if he got more carries, it'd be hard to believe he'd be able to maintain that yards per carry
That's
average.
The thing, too.
So at the same time, you're putting him in a position to succeed.
To succeed based on his skill set.
When you're running a team, that's your job.
And I concur 100%. And even if Mostert moved on, my opinion, don't make Akahani your workhorse. Draft a Braylon Allen or somebody that's a different style. Still put him in a system because Akahani's most effective when he can come in, rip off long runs on a tired defense that's already been trying to keep up with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, and then let him rest a little bit and let Mostert do his thing. These guys complement each other really well.
Keep what makes him special. Period.
Keep what makes him special. Don't ask him to do things that aren't his strength and then wonder why he wasn't as productive. That's that foolishness. Utilize him for what he's capable of. I would not be even 1% shocked if he and Mostert both went over 1,100 yards rushing this year if Akahani stays healthy. Because, again, he had 800 yards last year in 11 games.
That wouldn't shock me, and if that happens, they're going to win the division. I mean, at least.
If they don't, it's going to be because their defense just failed them or something. Yeah.
Which I think, and their defense is fairly strong. They've had some losses, but
they're
still
decent
pretty good.
enough. Yeah.
So
their defense is good enough to complement and complement that offense. So yeah, I would not if he stays healthy. It wouldn't shock me, like I said, not even 1% to see him go over 1,000 yards, and for Mostert also to do it. Mostert's not an afterthought. They're both very good running backs. So. Yeah, I think this guy's explosive, exciting. I'm interested to see what he does throughout the rest of his career. And it wouldn't shock me at all to see him go over 1,000 yards and Mostert do the same. All right. Now, the last guy we're going to talk about, another second-year running back that I know we're both fans of. Yeah. That is Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. Last season, he was a pretty high draft pick coming out of Alabama. I believe first-round pick, maybe the number 5 overall. I'll have to look into that if I want to, or maybe I just won't. Maybe he wasn't. He was a pretty high draft pick, though, if I remember.
Yeah, I thought he was in the low teens, but you could be right.
And you could be right. We had to figure that one out. Nonetheless, he began the season also in a system with David Montgomery. Gibbs wasn't getting a lot of opportunity at the beginning of last season. Some people were frustrated. I heard some people saying, why'd they draft him if they're not going to play him? There's a simple answer to that. David Montgomery was having a very good season. Sure. He was getting the bulk of the carries, and I did not disagree because Jahmyr Gibbs, my outlook was, he's got his whole career to be a star, and I think he still will be. But right now, David Montgomery, Dan Campbell was riding the horse that was getting him. But Montgomery did get injured at a certain point. Gibbs ended up playing in 15 games, starting only 3 when Montgomery was out. But even when Montgomery came back, Gibbs had proven himself, and it was more of a split backfield. Jahmyr Gibbs did have 2 games of over 100 yards rushing last year. Ended the season with 182 carries, 945 rushing yards, and 10 rushing touchdowns. If it feels like I emphasize that number of touchdowns, it's because I did. When you're in a system and you still score double-digit touchdowns on the ground, it's worth some emphasis when being spoken. He also added 52 receptions, 316 yards, and a receiving touchdown. So over 1,200 yards of total offense, actually 1,301 of total offense. Added 52 receptions as a running back who wasn't the workhorse running back. Having said all that, Talmadge, and I know we're both fans of Jahmyr Gibbs, what's your outlook on him for this season?
This guy's going to be a top 5 back in the league this year, especially fantasy-wise. But I'm talking even just production.
Real NFL or fantasy,
I don't think I'm going too far on a limb to say 2 to 3 years from now he's the best back in the league. He's that good.
We'll wait and see, but I don't. Yeah, that.
Especially in today's
doesn't
league.
shock me.
Well, when you look at it, we just mentioned we don't know where in the first round he was drafted, but the mere fact he was drafted in the first round tells you something. Running backs don't go in the first round very often.
And the fact that Dan Campbell said, "I'm drafting this guy here," he saw something in it.
And he's got a good pedigree. He's been good in college.
Played at a top program. He's not from
a high-profile program.
Some place that you had to go. They have a football team,
Exactly. I just don't see any weakness. Now, I will admit I don't watch a bunch of film on him. I'm going to start this year, though. But I don't know how good he is in pass protection. But other than that,
not sure either.
Everything else, if he's not 10 on a scale of 10, because nobody's perfect, he's 7'8" in every category. He can catch the ball.
Yeah.
He's got decent power. He's shifty as well. He's got good size. He's not very tall, but he's got for 5'9",
200. Yeah, he's
and in fact in football season, I think he can get up to 205 and not lose any speed.
and he's got some power in that
Yeah,
200-pound frame. He's
got some wiggle to him. I mean, there's really no weakness. Like I said, besides pass protection, I don't know. But everything else that I've seen offensively, really no weakness. And he's another back. Yeah, he can catch the standard screens and leak out the backfield, but he can also run routes.
Yeah.
He's a running back that you have to put a nickel on. You can't put a linebacker on.
Oh,
him.
he'll burn the linebacker most of the time.
People will try it, but I'm saying you might
Yeah.
be forced to put a nickel or at least a safety, depending on your defensive alignment.
Right.
And anytime a running back can cause mismatch problems like that, then all of a sudden you're talking about a special player. I think he'll be a 1,400-yard rusher. Not this year necessarily, although it wouldn't shock me, but I'm saying in his career,
He's got that
he's going to
capability.
approach that 1,500-yard season. He's that good to me. And like I said, top 5 back clearly to me, and has a chance to be a top 3 back in the next 2-3 years,
okay.
if not the best back.
I would say I disagree with a lot of what you said, but that's just not true. We hadn't discussed all this before. I know we're both fans of Jahmyr, but man, I see the same stuff. He's got speed. He's got explosion. He makes good cuts. He makes pretty good decisions. The guy had double-digit touchdowns last year. Wasn't their starting running back. Had 945 yards. He really is that good. He's a special player. The only thing I will say, a lot of people, I think, are forgetting David Montgomery is still there. David Montgomery's not an afterthought. Do I think Gibbs is better? Yes. Do I think he has more upside and more potential because he's younger and he's more explosive and quicker? Yes. But David Montgomery's still valid. He's still relevant. If I'm Dan Campbell, David Montgomery's still an important part of my offense. I'm going to get Jahmyr Gibbs every opportunity. And again, like we said with Akahani, I'm going to maximize him for what he's great at. I'm still happy to have David Montgomery because he's still a solid running back.
And he's such a versatile player. You can do a lot with Montgomery. You can split Montgomery out wide. You can do a lot of things with him formation-wise to even have both of them on the field in certain packages. So
you can.
This doesn't diminish Montgomery at all. In fact, like we've said multiple times in this discussion,
episode,
versatility is key with running backs nowadays, and most backs are going to be in a joint backfield. So a creative mind can find ways to make it work, and both these guys can catch the ball too. All of a sudden, you can do a lot of different things with an offense when you've got two versatile backs.
When you got two running backs that are interchangeable.
We're just saying Gibbs is the superior talent.
I think, yes. And last year, Montgomery, even with the games he missed and even with Jahmyr Gibbs' emergence, he still had 1,000 yards rushing. So I'll say like I did with Akahani and Mostert, I fully expect Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery to probably both have 1,000 yards rushing this year. If Montgomery doesn't, it's only because Gibbs just really starts to put more of a gap to separate himself. And within another couple of years, that's probably what will happen. I think Jahmyr... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and both these backs, but especially Jahmyr, since we're talking about him, really helped Goff a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Because Jared Goff has blossomed in Detroit. Because when he got traded to Detroit, people thought he was just a throw-in because they needed somebody to play quarterback.
He's just going to be there and his career's about over.
And we're going to draft a quarterback to replace him. But we've got to take somebody back, and we need somebody for this
flourished,
year.
Really, since he's been there.
He's better than that. And these two backs are one of the reasons why.
Oh, yeah. They're actually two of the reasons why. If we want to really look at it that way. But, yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. To me, Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson both, which I didn't mention Bijan because his situation, it kind of has changed, but he was the clear-cut lead back last year while we're not talking about him now. But I'm a huge fan of Bijan Robinson. We could do a whole episode about him, and maybe we will, another topic within a topic. I think Bijan and Jahmyr for the next few years, barring some horrendous injury to either one of them, you're going to start to see those guys kind of take the mantle, and along with Breece Hall, there's a lot of good young talent. But as great as McCaffrey is, nobody's getting younger. So within a few years, when he slows down and maybe starts thinking about life after football, these guys are going to be the next Christian McCaffrey.
And a lot of usage.
So these Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, and I'll say Breece Hall too. In the next few, we're going to be talking about those guys. for years. I wouldn't be surprised 10 years from now if we're not saying, can you believe they're still this good? Like, I'm not joking. Barring injury, Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs, I wouldn't be shocked if we're
I
saying,
can see it.
can you believe they're still this good?
can see it.
And some guys we haven't heard of now are in a system with Bijan and Jahmyr, but it's like, man, these guys are 31, 32,
still
and they're
productive.
still very good running backs. I fully expect that for both those guys in seasons to come. So, all right, that is our episode for today. Very fun topic. I really
sir.
enjoyed discussing it as Talmadge and I could talk about the color of paint, and it would be interesting, at least to us. So anyway, we're going to wrap that up. First episode on an NFL topic, and you're welcome. And there will be more.
Many
If you
more.
did like the episode, click the like button. And what is it that we've been saying on some of these episodes that they could also do?
Subscribe.
That's the one. You could subscribe to the channel. It will help me to continue to be able to bring you this type of content and all kinds of other content, because none of you really have too much of a grasp on all that goes on inside of this brain of mine.
And they don't want it either.
And yeah, I always tell people, if you could ever get inside of my head, you'd probably be screaming for an escape pretty soon, because you just wouldn't be able to handle just the sheer volume alone of what goes on inside of my brain. But anyway, thank you all so much. For Talmadge Roger Varnado the third, I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J. Miyagi Faslamajama. Thank you all for stopping by, and hope to see you again real soon.
10 years.